You are listening to the Racer to Racer podcast presented by Race 92. Race 92 is a vintage-inspired racing apparel brand specializing in celebrating vintage race culture and adapting to motorsports today. Check out race92.com for all your racing merchandise needs. I'm your co-host, Aaron McAtee. Other co-host, you may have seen walking out of Barber Lounge 459 with a big old smile on his face. You've probably seen him at a dirt track. He is Scott Bowley.
Hello, Aaron. Recently, if you had been attending the Heart Banquet, you would have seen me gathering our awards.
Absolutely.
And point
I have it right here.
Oh, right there, right behind you. State of Indiana, nice little plaque. Thank you to the people from Harf. It was nice to Danny Williams Sr. was one giving out the awards. It was nice to see him again. Grant King Racers were there. Sat and talked with them. It was a good time.
Yep, and I do apologize that I was not there. I had a pretty good excuse. I was at 24 Hours of Daytona, so definitely. I mean, I would have been. Everyone knows I would have been there if I could have been, obviously. But fortunately, Mr. Scott Bowley was there to accept both of the awards. So. Yeah. I have a wonderful picture of you holding up both of them that I will cherish for the rest of my life.
It was it was a good time. I got to see some friends I hadn't seen in years, and it was nice to see some people. So
I think your acceptance speech went something along the lines of you never would have thought you would have got an award in media and racing.
Yeah, I did. That was one of the last things I said. I said, of all the things I've done in racing, I didn't think I'd get a media award. But it was very appreciated. So thank you to everyone, and thank you to you for all the hard work you do, and good times.
Absolutely. So yeah, like I said, I was at 24 Hours of Daytona, stayed for the entire race, and then afterwards I went to Disney World for a couple of days with my girlfriend, which was a good time as well. So yeah, I mean, 24 Hours of Daytona, obviously, Elio and Simon Pagino, Tom Bloomquist. And I'm missing someone.
Yeah, I forget who their other driver was.
Yeah, I just drew a blank. I apologize, but it was a good race. Obviously got to watch start. Stayed for a while in the evening, and then obviously came back for the finish and in the morning. So pretty good race. Obviously, those Michael Shank guys are hard to beat.
Yeah, no, I didn't get to watch a lot of it. I did get to watch some. They were tough, very tough. They were fast, and they had their game together. I mean, the racing was close, but they had their game together, and they won. So, I mean, hats off to them. Simon being a former guest of the show, always good to see that. You got to see some other former guests of the show and friends of the show. It was like a racer to racer reunion down there.
It really was. And before, I was saying earlier, I forgot who the other driver was. It was Colin Braun. Colin Brown.
There you go.
Braun. So I don't know how to say his last name, so I apologize. I think it's Braun. But Colin Braun, Tom Bloomquist, Elio Castroneves, and Simon Pagino. So good to see those guys. All great guys. And yeah, obviously, couple other former guests of the show. I know Hinchcliffe was walking around. Who else was there?
Jared Andretti. Yeah,
Jared Andretti, absolutely. Gabby Chavez.
Unfortunately, Will Power couldn't be there. But yeah, and then you got to see Jagger Jones.
I was about to say. I mean, I was the first person he actually saw walking in.
Yeah,
I can't forget about Jagger Jones. I almost forgot about Jagger Jones.
Guest host of the show. He deserves as much of the award as anybody does in a lot of ways. He's done a lot of great fill-in work for us, and then you got to see David the Man Land. So it was good.
Yep, and they made a really big announcement there. Jenson Button, Jimmy Johnson, and Mike Rockefeller will be driving the Garage 56 entry and the next gen NASCAR at 24 Hours of Le Mans this year. So I think that surprised a lot of people. Maybe not the Jimmy Johnson part, but obviously the Jenson Button part kind of seemed to be out of left field. Uh, so he was there, and I saw he was walking around most of the week and just kind of taking it in. And actually, and I think the reason why they stuck around was because on I think Monday and Tuesday or Tuesday, Wednesday, they did a test of the car and did at least 12-hour stint just to see how it would
Yeah.
stand up. So yeah, it's a
Yeah.
cool deal. I don't know if I really understand the whole purpose behind it because they're going to be in their own class. So, but I don't know, it's cool.
Yeah. It's a definitely a different concept. Yeah, it was funny to see him with headlights in it and taillights in it. And I tell you, a strange sight though is seeing, speaking of Jimmy Johnson, the 43 car out in California, and you see a photo of the hauler, and it doesn't say Petty on it anymore, and just says Legacy Racing and Motorsports, whatever it's called now, and the car's black. And man, that's a little bit of a shock for somebody like myself who
Oh
was
yeah,
always a massive Richard Petty fan. Of course, the day was always going to come, but boy, you hate to see it, right?
absolutely. It is kind of a shock. I mean, almost, you probably do some comparisons. I was going to say AJ Foyt number 14, but I mean, the only thing kind of consistent with number 14 is that AJ owns it, right? So because
Right,
the color's kind of all over the place on the car. So
right.
um, other than that, there was a NASCAR race. So the I guess it's called the exhibition race of the Coliseum. Martin Truex Jr. won that. I was not able to catch that, but
I saw
I,
parts of it.
yeah.
I mean, it was typical short track racing, a lot of beating and banging. The crowd was terrible early, but typical LA, Southern California crowd, maybe it's all of California, looked like they had a really strong crowd by the time the
Mhm.
main event came. So, man, that's just how it's going to be out there. Football, basketball games, they always show up late and leave early, but uh, you know, that's cool though. It's good to see him getting a crowd. Um, I haven't seen a lot on just the opinions of the race from this year, so that's going to be interesting to see going forward.
Only other major news story I think we got to mention is Ford coming back to Formula One with Red Bull
Yeah,
in a couple years. I think 2025 or 2026.
yeah. I think it's probably 26, I
Yeah.
believe.
So, it's
Uh,
cool to see them come back. It'll be interesting to see kind of where Red Bull ends up kind of in the mix that first year. I would think that, first year may be probably a little more challenging, but I guess you never know. Ford obviously is very well developed. They definitely have the ducks aligned. But it's still going to be a new experience for them. Even though they've been in Formula One in the past, obviously things have changed a little bit since then.
yeah, it's not a shocker. I mean, this has been around for a little bit, but to officially announce it, and
Mhm.
boy, as good as it is for Red Bull and F1, as an IndyCar fan, it hurts a little bit to see. And I know that they're mad at IndyCar, and they'll probably never ever come back to IndyCar. I get all that. You just hate to see it. And speaking of IndyCar, all the teams in the leader circle, whatever they call that, for the top 22 teams, took a haircut of about $150,000 to basically pay into what would essentially be a franchise advertising fee for the series because they have new direction in marketing, and I hope it works because these teams need that money.
Yeah.
And but I mean, you have to, as they say, you have to trust the process. So I it's anything that pulls money away from the teams is really bothersome to me. But maybe I'm not seeing the picture correctly. Um, but some of those teams took if you got a 4-car team, you're looking at $600,000. So that I mean
Yeah, like I said, I
that's a
mean,
big nut.
may not affect the big teams, but some of those smaller teams, that may be one or
Yeah,
two people's job. So
yep, I agree. And that's that's rough, and I just hope it pays off because I mean, bottom line is I love IndyCar, uh, and they've got some great personalities. They've had some great races, um, but the winds of change have been going against them lately instead of with them. For a while, I really felt like they had all the wind underneath them, and now I'm starting to think that what I was thinking was absolutely wrong, and I hope I'm not because man, it's just you can't say, well, I know the thing is, well, F1's F1 and NASCAR's NASCAR and IndyCar's IndyCar. Well, but you see, I mean, at least NASCAR's stagnant, which is good. I mean, not great, but it's still good. F1's growing, which is great, and it's really hard to tell where IndyCar is. One week you feel like it's growing, next week you feel like it's stagnant, and then the following week you feel like it's contracting. And
Absolutely.
I don't. I hate saying that, but that's just kind of how it is.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. But I mean, really, other than that, want to just first off, we're releasing Johnny O'Connell this week. So Johnny was a great talk. We did this a few weeks ago. I
Yeah,
think everyone will
really.
enjoy it. Obviously, Johnny is a very well accomplished race car driver, the most successful GM factory driver of
Right.
all time. So in the United States. So obviously drove in the IRL, drove the Indy 500. Which I don't think he'll be the first to tell you that he did not have the best equipment for the Indy 500. But he's definitely proud to say that he drove an Indy 500, and yeah, I think everyone will enjoy that talk. Love Johnny; he's a great guy, funny guy, and just has a lot of good things to say for sure.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. One of the great things about this show is getting to talk to a lot of people. I knew their names, didn't know a lot about, definitely didn't know their personalities,
Mhm.
and you're really seeing. You can really, if you go back through these shows, you can really get a feeling, kind of why some of these guys really made it. Because they're just the way they carry themselves and that sort of thing. So yeah, it was a great talk. Really enjoyed it.
And especially when people respond and say they'll do a podcast, you can tell a lot about a person as well.
Right. Yeah.
Oop. but but no, so I want to thank everyone for watching the episodes, and please like and subscribe if you haven't already. I think we are planning on doing another McGilvery's live show, I believe February 28th, but we'll keep everyone posted on that. It may have a couple other things going on. Also want to thank Fast Times Indoor Karting for being a great partner. Obviously we do our Pro versus Joe's video series. We have one that it's all done. I'm just waiting for the right time to release it. So hopefully here in a couple weeks, I'll probably release that. And actually, speaking of Fast Times, I just want to say thank you to good friend Mr. Jeff Dodge, who will actually be in the next video that I release from Fast Times. He invited me out this past weekend for his first annual partner invitational. And since we invited him to race, he thought it was fitting to invite me to race as well. So I got to race against him and Jimmy Kite, and had a lot of fun. I actually have my fastest lap ever there. Little upset about that because it was unofficial. It wasn't during our video, so I can't update the board yet. So but I think I got it in me for another one. So
Yeah, no, it's good. That was a good group of guys too. Jeff Dodge, who people may or may not remember, he ran in Indy Lights.
yeah.
He got a deal from running sprint cars in Knoxville, and that's when he first came back here. And that's when I first met him when I still had the shop. Like Jeff, obviously I've known him for a long time. At this point, Jimmy's always great. Mike, I almost did too. Joe Devon, Mike Devon's son, was there running. Joe Devon being the proprietor of DRC Chassis, builders of Silver Crown cars, sprint cars, midgets. He was there with you guys. So that's really cool. The diverse group of guys, and
Man,
Yeah,
three
no, that's
races.
good.
We all have three
Cool to
races
see.
basically in a row. We got like one race in between as a break, but I mean that's a lot. I mean, one race usually is enough. So it's pretty
Right.
physically demanding. So it was cool though. I enjoyed it. I think I got a little bit more confidence boost in me now. So maybe get a little bit of an advantage for our next one. But hey, gotta
Yeah,
get what you can take, right? Take what you can get.
that's right.
So but other than that, yeah, thanks everyone for watching and listening. And if you don't notice, Scott Bally is still very comfortable thanks to the good guys heating and cooling.
Yep, the good folks are good guys. I don't have any concerns about my furnace, and it's been running pretty hard. It was cold here for a few days. Um, and now things were great. Anybody, if they need a tune up, anything of that nature, in your Indianapolis area, please reach out to the good guys, and they will definitely set up an appointment and get you taken care of. And gotta also give a shout out to friend of the show. We mentioned him already once, David Land. He started a new podcast. I have not had a chance to listen or watch it yet. I will do it, but good for that guy. No, I'm just joking around. No, good for something. It's especially as somebody who makes a living in motorsports. I think you got to keep trying to stay diverse, and that's a good deal for him. So, good luck to him. And other than that, that's about all I got.
Absolutely. Well, hope everyone enjoys. And yeah, hope everyone has a great week.
Yeah, take care, everybody.
Our guest today is a most successful GM factory driver in the United States. He's a three-time ALMS GT1 champion, a four-time 24 Hours of Le Mans class winner, the 2001 24 Hours of Daytona overall winner, and drove in the 1996 Indy 500. We were joined by Johnny O'Connell. Now, Johnny, that's a very impressive resume. I mean, we've interviewed some real legends of the sport, and you're definitely up there. In that resume, I think it would be hard for just about anyone to beat. So it's very impressive.
Well, thank you. I was pretty fortunate in my career. I started out, I wanted to be an open wheel guy, to try to get over to Europe and race Formula One. And actually, earlier in my career, I had a fair amount of help from Bobby Ray Hall and Jackie Stewart. And unfortunately, at that time, American companies weren't wanting to spend money on an American in Europe. Whether it was Budweiser or back then you had tobacco sponsorship. They wanted, if you were racing, we were trying to race British Formula 3, and they wanted to spend their money on British guys, which kind of stunk. And but what got all the way up to Indy Lights before I realized, and it's really kind of funny because I saw what I was making racing Indy Lights, and I was driving for Chip Ganassi, and I know what I made that year, and I know what Tommy Kendall made racing Chevrolet. And Tommy's a buddy of mine, and I'm like, I know he was making a lot more money racing sports cars, and so that's when I really started taking a good look at sports cars, and got very fortunate to hook up with Nissan in the early '90s.
So where did kind of your interest in racing start for you? So you first started racing go-karts, right?
Yeah, very young. Actually, my very first, driving experience was I was probably 5-6 years old, and the family were on vacation in Cape Cod, and they had one of those goofy little, rental go-kart places. And I was too tiny, but they let me sit on my dad's lap. This was before lawyers ruined the world. And and I was hooked. I mean, I was just hooked, and I pretty much made, the decision at that point in my life. I was lucky. I had a really good, second grade teacher, and pretty impressionable young man, I guess. But she was the one that taught us about being an American living in the United States, and you can be whatever you want. If you want to be president, you can be president. If you want to be a doctor, lawyer, whatever it is that you aspire to, you can do. And by the second grade, I already knew, I wanted to race. I started racing karts in about the 7th or 8th grade, and actually chose my college because there was good go-karting nearby. And just one thing led to another. I've been very, very fortunate. Most kids that make it in racing come from a super wealthy family. We were just your average, every now and then my dad would buy me a set of tires for my go-karts and stuff like that. But, and spent a lot of years being super poor. It's funny. I've got 2 kids now. And when I was 28 years old, I was living in a garage. And, because I told myself I'll give myself till I'm 30. And luckily, things turned out okay, but it definitely wasn't easy.
Right. So you took you decided at that young age, you said, man, this is it. This is what I'm going to do for life. And then pretty much everything you did after that was just focused and funneled into that.
100%. It's funny. I was a pretty decent soccer player. That's actually what got me into the college. And when you were a freshman, and it was Denison University, that's how I got to know Bobby Rahal. We both went to the same school. But there was a great go-kart track about 2 hours away. Well, as a freshman, I couldn't have my van on campus. So I had a van that I kept my cart in. But my sophomore year, you could have a car. And so I quit soccer, totally focused on the racing. And then I can actually remember the dates, August 9th through 11th, 1983. Good Lord Almighty, is that aging myself. That's when I went through the, the Jim Russell British School of Motor Racing out of Riverside, California. And unbelievable getting to drive a Formula Ford for the first time. And it was total lucky because my school made you do internships. And so it was my senior year, and I asked, hey, can I do an internship out there, spend January out there? I'll do my best as a mechanic or answer phones. And they're like, yeah, sure. Well, while I was out there, I found out they had a competition called the Graduate Runoff. So if you've been through the school but not raced with them, and it was $720, and I didn't have the money. I borrowed it from my dad, and they was filled. It was 56 spots, and 56 guys had already signed up for it. And they were like, if somebody doesn't show up, you're in. Somebody didn't show up. I was in. Long story short, I won the thing, and then won a year of racing for free. So, wow. Lucky a lot. So, but and it's funny because I look back then, I've had like 6 or 7 teammates that are ex-Formula One drivers. And you ask them, when did you have the most fun? And you would think, oh God, it's when I was racing for McLaren or whatever team they might have driven for. None of them say that. They always say I had the most fun in go-karts or the Formula Ford stuff. And so that time in my life, even though I was really wicked poor, was some of the most fun racing and memories that I've had.
Is that because at that point you're still doing it for the love of it, right? You want to make a career out of it, but it's still out in the future and you're just trying to get there.
Yeah, there were never any distractions from what I wanted to do. Right. There were a lot of moments of anger and frustration when the guys that I felt were lesser drivers, but they had rich dads that could do it. They move up the ladder, and you're like, this really stinks. But I think it also just it drove me. But there were times when you're younger and working your way through the sport, and I am not the only one. A lot of guys, run across this. It's funny, when I drove for Chip Ganassi, Chip was, definitely a unique individual, but he had great saying, and especially back then, he's a much cooler guy now than he was then. But he had the saying, most grapes don't get picked. Most grapes die on the vine when it comes to race. As in, most talent never gets past Formula Ford. They can't afford it. And that's true now. It was true back then. And it is It's a shame, but the financial aspect of the sport is a big part of it. I got lucky. I met a guy that was willing to finance me for a little bit, enough to make a name and get the ball rolling to where I started getting hired.
For you, what was really the hardest thing adapting from open wheel racing to sports car racing? What was the hardest thing to kind of get used to with the transition?
A great question. The Formula cars, if you put an input, you get an immediate reaction. All right, you move the steering wheel just a little bit, and the car instantly responds. With sports cars, there's a slight delay because of the mass. Now that was the case in the first real sports car that I drove was that Nissan, the 300ZX. And there was mass there, and you had the Yokohama tires had a huge sidewall. So you'd input your steering, but there'd be a delay before the car really reacted, and then it would roll, and then it would set. When I was doing all the testing for NPTI in the Group C and GTP stuff, a prototype is so close to an Indy car, that an input in the steering wheel or the brakes or the throttle gave you an immediate reaction. So those types of cars, you're probably a little bit more connected. Whereas with the sports cars, the sedans, if you have a car that doesn't have aero, there's a little bit of delay, and you gotta learn how your timing a little bit.
Right. And I mean, and another thing with sports car racing, obviously, is the races are much longer. And then endurance races, obviously, 24-hour races. Like, how did you really approach those races any different than any other race?
Back in the day, God, I hate that I can say back in the day, but like say you were running at Sebring and you could do a lap, a quick lap would be a 2:03. Okay. And you wouldn't race it at 2:03. You'd race it at 2:07. You take some out, you'd lengthen your braking zones, slow the shifts down a little bit. You got to look after the gearbox, things like that. But by the time you got to about 2001, 2002, the cars were pretty much bulletproof. They're really hard to break them. And so you stopped taking, lap time out. So like at Le Mans, if a good lap was say a 3:56, the old days you run at a 4-minute, but now, if a good lap is 3:56, well, you're going to do 3:56 every lap. And the neat thing about endurance racing now, I had some pretty great teammates. I had Jan Magnussen, Antonio Garcia, ex-Indy car guys, Ron Fellows. I got to race with some really good guys. Well, if I go down in the garage and I see Jan's doing 3:55s, I know I got to do 3:55s. So there's a lot of internal pressure within you and the team to keep pushing. And I like that aspect. Even though it's 24 hours, the fact that you're attacking it nonstop is pretty cool.
You mentioned in the old days you'd stretch the lap a little bit, and today there's no gap. I mean, you got to be in your time. And from a physical and mental standpoint, as that picks up, and I'm not necessarily saying for you, I'm just saying for all drivers, does that shorten your stints? Or, I mean, since you're working that much harder and you're always mentally there, but I think is the difference between stretching the lap a little bit and trying to be right in the number every lap.
It is both. They're different skill sets. I mean, if you told me to do a 4:07, you figure out within 2 laps how to do a 4:07. Where do you brake? How all that stuff. So you're driving with the same intensity, but just with when you're pushing real hard, the margin of error is smaller. As athletically, the cars now are so much easier to drive than back in like 2001, 2002. I mean, where cars are now with ABS, and they ought to get rid of ABS. ABS, in my mind, is wrecked. Has taken the skill aspect out of drivers. I mean, any knucklehead can, go to the 200 marker and then hit the pedal as hard as they can. There's no really skill set in that. But because now the cars are air conditioned, you've got unbelievable ABS, traction control that you can literally get into the corner, floor it, and let the computer drive you out of the corner. I mean, the guys that got 1600s on their SATs have, and they're so valuable to the sport, but it's so much easier to drive a car now. And again, back in the day, we used to run cool shirts, run a cool, and that helped. And you could do a double on a hot day, but you get out and you'd still be hot. Well, once they introduced air conditioning, a double now becomes 3 or 4 stints. The reason that works is that you're cooling your body from the inside. If you're breathing air that's 70 degrees, you can be in a 130, 140 degree environment and you're fine.
Right.
That's interesting.
Definitely makes a big difference. Yeah.
Yeah.
So 1994 was your first year at Le Mans, and you won your first year. So talk a little bit about that experience, kind of what it was like to go to Le Mans.
Again, it was, and that's one that I never, you're like, yeah, it'd be cool to be there one day, but you never think it's going to happen. And then it happens. And I just, man, like then the track's a little bit different now. But the first time you come through Tetra Rouge and you look down and you see that famous, you see Mulsanne, and you're going through the gearbox and you're just like, where's the corner? Because you're hauling, and it's such a magical lap, and the aura to the place. I was lucky I got to do an Indy 500. To me, Indy doesn't even come close to the intensity of Le Mans. I mean, Le Mans is a worldwide event. You got all the manufacturers there. It's pretty crazy. And I got like one of my best memories. We were lucky. We won the thing, but we went there with an IMSA setup, a US setup, which is generally a high downforce setup. We didn't take wing out or, do anything to take aero out of the car. So we would not have the crazy top end. We were probably 190, maybe 195 against the Group C cars who are doing like 230. But one of my favorite memories is going into the first chicane and a Group C car passes me and then pulls right in front of me. And that's at about the 300 board. And I know, because I've been watching, those guys are braking at about the 250. Well, we had so much aero, we could break it like the 100. So in the braking for the first chicane, he passes me, and then I go and brake at the 100 and pass him and go through the first chicane. And actually in the first chicane, it's Hans Stuck, and Hans and I had some good races in the rain and stuff. And I'm sure he had no idea it was me, but as he goes by me, he flips me off. And I'm like, oh, to me, that was the coolest thing in the world, getting flipped off by Hans Stuck. So yeah, no, that was pretty cool. And then I got lucky. At Le Mans, I got to race it 15 times, podium 9, and win it 4. And motor racing fans know what it's like there. You go on the stage at the end, and there's literally 100,000 people on the straightaway, and they're playing, our national anthem and raising the flag. That's rocking chair equity right there.
I like it. That you mentioned earlier, you're 28 in a garage, and you had put a self-imposed cutoff at 30. And at 30, where did you have to be in your mind at 30 that say, okay, we're not doing this anymore? Like, what I'm saying? Like, where would you have, like, what part of the ladder would you have had to been on?
Well, making a living, and know, hey, there's a future here, or that, had I felt, and this doesn't sound, maybe it sounds arrogant or whatever, but if I had felt I'd run against a guy that was stronger than me, I might have had second thoughts. But I never raced a guy, till that point in my life that I was like, that guy's just better, And luckily I didn't have to make that decision,
Right.
But but because it was like when I was 28, at that time, that was when I got the Indy Lights deal, and then the Nissan stuff happened. And then, there were, again, there were difficult years in there, when sports car, kind of faded in the mid 90s, when IMSA was really failing. And then they became professional sports car, whatever it was, for a while. And then, thank God, Don Panos entered the sport, because in my mind, worldwide, he is really the person most responsible for the sports car racing we enjoy today.
Wow.
Who, so if we're going to use old sports analogies here, so if you're Magic Johnson, right? Who's your Larry Bird? Who is the guy that you were always thinking about, or was there a guy?
No, there were always guys. There were, well, always your teammate. You got to be your teammate.
Yep.
And that's very Formula One, but you got to be your teammate. But guys, I thought Tommy Kendall was a great racing driver. He and I didn't get to race as often as I would like. Jeff Brabham was really cool. Ari Leyendijk was fun to work with. But in the sports car stuff, and again, when I was racing Ford Corvette and we were against the Pro Drive guys, they were pretty good. Thomas Enga was a great race car driver. The Ferrari would every now and then show up with guys that were really good. Always had, we had some great battles with Porsche, with Jörg Bergmeister and Patrick Long. And there were, it's funny because what I would always do is, on my screensaver, rather than, a picture of my girlfriend or my dog or something, I would have the names of the guys that I'm racing against. Alvaro Perrin, was driver, Olivier Beretta, and so you would have, so like every time you look at your phone, I'd be like, all right, those guys might be going to the gym today, so I got to go to the gym today, and just kind of live that. I don't think there's anything wrong with having that personal challenge against another guy. But I got to race against some great guys, and make friends with great guys. McNish was a great guy. One of my favorite guys was Mika Stallo, really cool guy. JJ Leto. I got to be out there and hang out with some pretty cool guys.
Well, I think that's the difference between good and great, right? Like the good guys go to the gym, the great guys try to get there a half hour earlier before everybody else, or an hour earlier.
Yeah. That Bryant thing,
Yeah, right.
But no, that's true. You gotta, the success in anything, I think, is the result of wanting it more than the next guy and being willing to dedicate, make the sacrifices. That's one.
So you talk a little bit about, switching from open wheel racing to sports car racing. So what made you kind of come up with the decision to go IndyCar racing, kind of going back to kind of where you came from in 1996 after you have already been in sports car racing for a few years?
Yeah, that was just trying to take advantage of the situation with what was going on with the IRL. There was no way to get the budget to do kart back then. If you had a ton of money, you could get an opportunity. And it's funny because in '93, Nissan had been considering going IndyCar racing. Sadly, and it was going to be myself and Jeff Brabham. Sadly, that didn't happen. But so the IRL formed. Nissan pulled out of sports car racing, and my Nissan team was like, let's try to do IRL. And so it was all the guys from the sports car team trying to learn oval racing real quick. And what do we do? I think we got like 10th at Disney, which was the first race. Then we got 3rd at Phoenix. And so we went into that first year it was a 3-race thing, and the 8500 was going to be their Super Bowl. And all we had to do was get a decent result. We could have won that first championship. But I got to tell you, that was the most miserable month I've ever had, because we didn't have any money. We didn't run at all the first week. Before I qualified, I had a total of, I think it was 140 laps around there, which is not a lot of laps. Most guys do 140 laps a day.
Right.
That was for a whole week. So we qualified 29th. And it was funny because they had been lecturing everybody, we got to have a good start. We got to be safe today. No wrecks, no wrecks. The world is watching, because you'll remember the guys at CART were like, yeah, those guys are all wankers and losers and yada, yada, yada. So it needed to be a good show. And I woke up thinking, all right, there's 33 guys here, and probably 25 are going to be really super safe. And I'm not going to do that. I'm going to attack right from the start, because I think guys would give up positions. And that's really what happened. We got up, I think we got as high as like 10th or 11th before our first fuel stop. And then we lost the fuel pump. And so yeah, we started 29th and finished 29th. But it was one of those races where I was, that was the year Lyondike was wicked fast. We weren't going to run with them. But by staying out of trouble and running, you'd be, top 7, top 10, and who knows what would have happened. But yeah, we did that. And then, again, it's not terrible to say, it's the truth. The first time I sat in an Indy car, now this is what I dreamed of, in IndyCar, Formula One. It was at the racetrack at Disney World. And the first thing I thought as I'm going through the gearbox is, I can't believe I don't get to drive this on a road course. And
right, sure.
Funny thing about Indy cars or cars in general, ovals, when the car is right, the most fun, badass thing in the world. Okay. Really. I mean, it's really cool. I had this goes back to my Atlantic days and my Super V days and Indy Lights day. I might have had a good oval car 5% of the time, and when you have a good car, you're literally waiting to be taken to the hospital. And so, looking at things and all that kind of stuff, and recognizing, I can have a good career in sports cars and not be, having to call everybody I know. The worst part about being a race car driver is, hey, and I'm going to try to do Indy cars next year. Do you think maybe you could put 5-10 grand in? Begging for money is really difficult. Some guys are good at it, but I wasn't one.
Right.
Yeah, and that part of the sport just never seems to change. It just seems to that part of the sport just seems to stay the course.
Yeah. No, it's difficult. It is. It's the hardest thing. And if you don't, come from a wealthy family, it's really, really difficult. It's really difficult. But that's how it's been. So. It is like Ganassi said, most talent dies on the vine.
Yeah. Now, obviously, we've talked to a lot of drivers who've driven the Indy 500, and it's kind of 50-50 on kind of the answer to this question. But I always ask, do you approach the Indianapolis Motor Speedway more like a road course or an oval? Because it seems like a lot of guys say road course, and that's why it seems like a lot of people with more of a road course background do so well there. Because every turn is different. Did you kind of view it more like a road course, or approach it like a road course, or an oval?
I approached it. I'm so the wrong guy to ask, because I sucked at Indy. but it, I know I approached it as an oval, and but didn't, setup wise and stuff was difficult. We didn't have anybody that knew anything. It's funny because I got to drive it again in '97. And I had gone there just to shake hands, kiss babies, and hope I got a ride. Well, Scott Sharp, who was running for Foyt in the Conseco show car, wrecked twice, and he dinged his skull. So they're like, "Hey, do you want to drive?" I'm like, "Yeah." Well, in 32 laps, I think we got to where we were third quick, and the racetrack all of a sudden, rather than being narrow, was wide. The car was easy. And then going into turn 1 on the 33rd lap, an oil fitting broke, and it was 8 miles to walk again. And so I think that if the car's right, it's fun, it's easy. And but I just, I approached it as more of an oval than a road course. Most road courses, you're not trimmed out. I mean, if there's anything, it'd be more similar to entering the Porsche curves at Le Mans, where you're really wicked fast, but not a whole lot of aero.
Right. So, you mentioned this a little bit before, but obviously 24 Hours Le Mans, one of the biggest races in the world, Indy 500, one of the biggest races of the world. How do you think like they really compare as far as like the pageantry, fanfare, kind of everything that leads up to the event? Because both have really big, just the pageantry involved with both events. It's just world class. And Indy 500 is the largest day single sporting event in the world. So, kind of, what's your input on that?
It's got to be so close, because I mean, Le Mans probably gets 300,000 people there. When you look, all the people that are camping on the infield, I mean, they got to be close. I know that Indy, I don't know whether they ever count anybody, but it is the parade at Indy is nice. The parade at Le Mans is insane. Just some of the stuff that they do at Le Mans, when you just go through scrutineering is, you take your race car, it's in the center of Le Mans, right by the cathedral, and you'll get 30,000 people showing up for that, just to watch the car get measured and go across the scales. And, you as drivers, you put on your driver suit, you sign autographs and all that kind of stuff. But the parade at Le Mans, it's like 10, 15 feet deep, and you and your teammates are going through this. And I mean, it's the crowd is literally 5 feet away from you on each side. I mean, it's just packed, but it's fun because 75% of the people there have been drinking all day. And so, or Danish people, and British people, and they're all drinking and partying. It's a pretty memorable experience. And then the pageantry before the start of the race, at Le Mans is pretty incredible, with them playing all the different national anthems as the morning goes on. It is, and that I felt the energy at Le Mans a lot more than I did at Indy. I think had I been able to do Indy 3, 4, 5 times, my feelings towards that place would be different. It's funny because after I wrecked there in '97, I never went back. And I remember one time, I'm friends with Lynn St. James, and Lynn's like, why don't you get passes there for life if you race there? The speedway bends over backwards to make anybody that raced there feel great and loved and welcomed. And she's like, why don't you ever go back? And I was like, it was one of the worst experiences in my life. That place almost killed me. And then I went back in 19, I think it was 2019. I got to drive one of the pace cars. Chevy wanted me to drive one of the pace cars on the pace car laps. And I stood there on the entry into turn 1 and was like, man, I wish I had gotten a fair shot at this. I think that would have been pretty cool, but it didn't. And so you can't have any regrets.
Yeah. That was a weird time for the sport too. That whole IRL time, and
yeah.
it's just such a strange period of time.
Yeah. No, thank God IndyCar's back. I think IndyCar racing now is great. There's amazing parity between the teams now. I mean, back in the day, it was going to be either Penske or Carl Haas, and now you got you'll have Andretti win, you'll have Ganassi win, you'll have Penske win, you'll have Dale Coyne win. I think that aspect of IndyCar racing has made it pretty exciting again.
Where do you see the sport of sports car racing? Are you happy with the direction, or not happy with the direction, or?
I think there's some cool stuff going on. I think the driver rating system is foolish. And
Everyone says that.
Yeah. And well, I'm a bronze now, finally. So I should be racing. But not only is the driver rating stupid, but the BOP is stupid. And, balancing the performance of all the cars. You go back to when I raced Nissan, we were getting every bit the crowds at Sebring, Daytona, all the races that they get now. The crowds aren't any bigger or better. And it is 2 quick stories here. So in 2000, it was Corvette's first time running Le Mans. They went, they got smoked by the Vipers. Month or two after the race, GM people fly over to France and they're like, listen, we really enjoyed it, but in order to be competitive next year, we need this rear wing, we need this restrictor, we need this, this, and this. And the French were like, no. You must make your car better. And wow, there's a unique concept, right? And so what happens now, all right, let's say you guys are like, all right, we want to go sports car racing, and you build a $5 million, GT3 car that is awesome. It's unbelievable. And you show up to the racetrack. I build a $2 million car. It's not as good. It's not as fast. Okay. What's going to happen in today's rules? If you and I race, you go out, you win the first race and you smoke everybody. What are they going to do? Well, they're going to slow you down or speed me up. Right? That's what BOP does. Yeah. And to me, it's the stupidest thing in the world, because rather than things being determined in the shop or on the racetrack or by the better driver or engineers, it's being, decided by a bunch of guys that probably didn't race themselves, a bunch of suits. And so to me, that's, I hate it. I don't like it at all. And in my mind, you can, within 2 races, probably get the cars to where they're pretty close, right? You get them pretty close, and then there's going to be a track that's going to favor the Porsche, that's going to favor the Ferrari, that's going to favor the Corvette, or whatever mark it is. But I think the twiddling and looking at data and all that kind of stuff, I don't like it at all. Just like I said, I don't like paddle shifting is cool, but get rid of ABS, and I think we would get to see drivers drive again.
Yeah, that's a real. I'm all for the technology, especially when it comes in this thing, sort of like paddle shifters, because actually the paddle shifting makes the transmissions and all that a lot more reliable. And all that. But it does. Technology can also work against you. I like it in the safety aspect, but once you get the cars, I mean, there's a certain point where the racing becomes more engineering based than driver based, and and that's all forms of motorsport. I don't care what it is, and I think you have to really walk that fine line, because I personally, as a fan, like I'm not. I go to see drivers. I don't go see engineering.
Yeah. It is. Well, it's funny because, you mentioned paddle shifting. Paddle shifting is fun. And guys don't miss gears. It's easier on the transmission. But back in the day, when you had an H pattern and you had a heel toe, that was a skill set.
Sure.
I might be better than you, or you might be better than me, and that's going to allow you to outbrake me.
Right.
So the individual athletic skill has been diminished, and then the cars are way more stout. Back in the day, you didn't see guys touch much.
Right.
A whole lot of stupid saying, rubbing is racing. And it is. I mean, back then racing was cleaner. There weren't as, the horrific wrecks as often as you see now.
Well, one of the problems is that you get everybody so close, then all of a sudden somebody sees a hole, they're going to lean on you and they're going to get into you to get by.
And you have ABS. It's funny because, it was we've all probably seen the movie Senna, and great movie. But when he's talking with Jackie Stewart's giving him a hard time. You see a gap and you don't go for it, then you're no longer a racing car driver. And that's, you see a gap all the time. And so just, if there's a gap, sometimes that gap's going to close. And so I think guys are less respectful of the safety or the positioning. And also, I love sim racing. I've got a great sim and all that kind of stuff. But I also think that kind of invites that type of behavior, because guys are training on their sim and, I'm going to go for a gap. Well, a simulator and a real thing are different. And it's funny, I got wrecked out of Long Beach while leading in 2015, and I made the comment, and it was a little cheeky. I can be a little bit cheeky, but I was like, all these guys think they're racing on a sim. And I thought it was pretty cool. I got hate mail from some sim guys, why are you throwing down on the sim? And you don't have a reset. And if you wreck in iRacing, it didn't cost the team $70,000, so it is, I don't know, my things are.
Well, you crash in iRacing, you don't have to, the machine to this point is not realistic enough to where it starts throwing parts off of it. People don't have to repair it.
Yeah.
So like you said, I mean, and there's no aspect of human of a human being getting physically hurt in the deal. And those are,
It's funny. I went to Petit Le Mans this year and just, walking down pit lane, and I swear there are guys there that are racing in the highest levels that aren't shaped. I mean, the kids, excuse me, are so young now. So
right.
The sport's changed, and but you don't see any of these guys, the young guys coming up that didn't have a parent, that had a ton of money.
Right.
Or maybe they haven't. I just haven't noticed.
So we've actually had your teammate on our podcast from 2001, 24 Hours of Daytona, Chris Neifel, one of your teammates. And so talk a little bit about, well, first off, Chris, kind of like you, he has no desire to really go back to Indianapolis. That's one thing he always kind of talks about. Last time he was there, I think, was when he ran in like 87 or 88. So it's kind of funny, but so talk a little bit about 2001. Obviously you guys win. And the other car on your team was, tons of attention. Dale Earnhardt Sr., Dale Earnhardt Jr. Just talk a little bit about that weekend and, getting to race against those guys.
Yeah, that was my first race for GM in the Corvette. And it was really neat because, Big E, as big a star as he was really a student, and I don't know why, but for some reason or another, in all the practice sessions, he and I would be out there at the same time. And he's the only guy that ever called me Rusty. I used to be, have bright red hair. And he's like, hey, Rusty, you seem to anything I can do better, you'd make sure you tell me and all that kind of stuff. He really wanted to get better. And one of the coolest things is that, the physics in road racing are that if you come out of a corner faster than me, by the end of the straightaway, you'll be faster than me. For some reason or another, Little E and Big E, when they go out on the Oval 1 through 2, they'd come out of 2 faster. Okay. Same in Oval 3 and 4. And we're like, this doesn't make sense. In the race, I come up and we're going to lap, the Earnhardt's, the 3 car, and it's Dale in the car. And rather than go by him, I'm like, I'm going to follow him for a lap or 2. And so he can show me what he's doing on the oval so I can go faster. And I got to tell you, the first time we came to the bus stop, and this was back when the bus stop was really cool. They kind of messed it up. I liked it better. The old way is a little bit more dangerous, but faster. And, but I come out on Oval 3 and I'm like 2-3 feet off the bumper of Big E. And we're coming through turn 4. And I mean, we never saw the shift light, in top gear. You just weren't geared, for that light to come on. And as we come towards start finish, I got my shift light just blazing. I mean, we are hauling. And I'm like, man, I can't believe I am drafting at Daytona with Big E. And it was, I mean, not many people can say that. And so it was very cool. And yeah, we were lucky. We that was a challenging race, ton of rain. And but yeah, to win the thing, overall was pretty spectacular. And it was actually, it's interesting that you said Chris was really the result, or his choices led to my biggest break. I was originally with GM only going to do Daytona, Sebring, Le Mans, and Petit Le Mans. And then that year, after Daytona, they offered Chris the job as chief steward for CART. And so he jumped at that, and that opened up the door, for me to do the full season with Corvette, and the rest is history.
So
what were the Earnhardts doing to pick up the speed? Where were they finding that speed
Well,
at?
they were, we would finish oval 1 out by the wall, but we wouldn't rush to get back to the bottom, and you might not even get back to the bottom. They would rush, get the left side tires right on the bottom, make the corner shorter, but also there were some different bumps down there. And so yeah, that was the trick.
So one thing, sorry, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah. No, we're good.
So one thing with, endurance racing is, you're having to switch during a race. And, in 2001 is a perfect example of this. Chris is one of the tallest professional racing drivers of all time. Like, what kind of adjustments, if any, really had to be made when you're transitioning from a 6'6" guy to you're what, like 6 foot?
No, I'm like 5'10", 5'11". And so, yeah, you make a foam insert. So actually the rotation was Ron, myself, Chris, then Frank Freon. And so when Ron would get out, I'd throw my insert in, and which would get me closer to the steering wheel so I could get to full throttle and all that kind of stuff. But when you're the third guy or the fourth guy, you're the low priority, and so my comfort at that race was not what I would have liked it to have been. But you're so happy to be there. And that was, the C5R, especially, and again, no traction control, no ABS, no, old fashioned. And, but that thing was a rocket ship. That thing was so fun to drive. And, but you'll like this. This is a funny story. So we're doing a press conference at Daytona, and the Earnhardts are there. Now, I just come from racing the prototypes. I've been racing for Panos, and I got into the Corvette, and I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, this car is awful. It doesn't stop. It doesn't turn. It doesn't accelerate. And because it was so much more mass without the aero and all that kind of stuff. Well, we're doing this press conference, and Big E's like, I got to tell you guys, this Corvette's the most amazing car I ever drove before. It stops when I want it to stop. It turns when I want it to turn. It goes when I want to go. And all I can think is, oh my God, a NASCAR must be miserable to drive. But it was funny because the Big E, he loved it. I mean, at 4:30 in the morning in the rain, he was in the pits, and he's just paying attention, joking with the guys. And he became very good friends with Andy Pilgrim, and he in his mind, that was likely to be his last year doing Cup, and he wanted to join Corvette Racing and go to race at Le Mans. So, Racing lost one heck of a great guy when that accident happened a couple weeks later.
I think that's really interesting. Again, this kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier. A guy widely considered the best ever, at least in his genre. He always wanted to learn. Like, he had no ego, and it was all about getting better. And I think that is a real look into why he was so successful at what he did to begin with.
Oh yeah, well, and he picked it up. I mean, that was a really wet year, and initially in the wet he was slow. By the end, his times in the wet were matching us. So it was no, he was a pretty special guy. But again, just like all the greats, they aren't afraid to challenge themselves and learn.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, talk a little bit about NASCAR. You got to experience NASCAR a little bit. You did just one nationwide race?
Yeah.
2013 with Junior Motorsports, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, what was that? How tough was it, or how similar is a NASCAR really from all those years of doing sports car racing? How hard was it for you to adapt to drive the NASCAR?
Well, the braking, because you can get wheel hop. Knowing those tires, I think Allmendinger won that year, and we had qualified 12th, and then I can't remember who the regular guy was. We out qualified the regular guy. But then I learned something really interesting, in that if you are not a regular guy there, you are totally disposable. So I worked my way up to 5th, and then came through turn 6, going into turn 7. I've got Kyle Larson behind me, and you don't pass anybody going into turn 7. Well, he tries to pass me in turn 7 and turns me sideways. I go bouncing off the tires on the driver's right, hit the front, hit the back. And now in a sports car, that's day over. Not in one of these cars. So I get first gear, I get going again, steering wheel is straight, no real wrinkles in the fenders. And they're like, keep going. And lap times are still there. So that dropped me down to like 13th. Well, I get myself back up to 5th. Okay. And now we're getting close to the end of the race and going into turn 5. Okay. Sam Hornish turns me backwards. And I'm like, Jesus Christ. And then it dawns on me, this is go-kart racing. This is literally like you and your best buddies go to the rental kart place. You don't care if you damage them, and you wreck each other, and you laugh and flip each other off and have fun. And so like literally that was one of those deals where the last 5 laps, everybody, that's 2 laps caution. Well, we came in and we'd fallen all the way back to 29th. And they came in, they gave me some sticker tires. And in the last 2 laps went from 29th back up to 12th, which was 2 things. Some of the most fun I ever had, and also the most flipped off I've ever been in my entire life. So it was an experience. I thought, I would have liked to have done it. And here's the funny thing. At the end of the race, okay, I'm like, what the heck was going on? Well, they had put a yellow bumper on me. I didn't know that for your first race, you have to race as a rookie or whatever. So if I'm racing against these guys, they know I'm not there for the points. I'm just there for one race. No wonder they're turning me backwards.
Sure.
Yeah. But it was pretty fun to drive. The engines in those cars are great. And for like 2 or 3 laps, the tires are really good.
So of all the cars you've ever driven, if you had to pick one car that you could go back and drive, and I'm guessing it's not going to be the Indy car, but if any car you could go back and drive, would there be one car that you had the most fun driving?
The 95 Reynard, I would love to run at a place like Road America, or get to race it on a road course. I think that would be pretty awesome. But the coolest car I probably ever drove was the Cadillac, the ATS VR. That thing was sick with its technology. Very, very precise car. Very precise car. The Formula Atlanta car, I got to drive a lot of stuff. The Panos was very cool. So it'd be very difficult to pick just one. Which one do I have the best memories of? Probably the Corvette. Getting to race at Le Mans with that car and win at Le Mans, and then shoot, the luck that we had at Sebring. I got to win Sebring at the time, and a lot of that was the Corvette. So yeah, no, pretty cool stuff. Hard to pick just one.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, everything you've driven, that it'd be hard to pick one. So as we're kind of winding down, now, I don't ask this of everybody, so you ought to feel special about this one. That best racing story you can share with us.
What?
Yeah, there it is, right there. Best racing story you don't mind sharing in a crowd.
I'll share. All right, so this is pretty cool. So in 2000, this was actually really funny. All right, there are 2 stories here. So in 2000, Don hired Mario Andretti, okay, to race at Le Mans. And he was teamed with Ian Magnuson and David Brabham. Now, to have Mario's everybody's hero. It is, when I've been lucky. I've gotten to meet a lot of my heroes. Most of them, you're like, you picked the right hero. 1 or 2 were jerks. I won't name who they were, but Mario's the real deal. He's the coolest guy in the world. And when you go out to dinner with Mario and he's got a glass of wine and he starts sharing stories of stuff, from the 60s and 70s. That's rocking chair equity. But that year at Le Mans, my teammate was a little Japanese guy named Hiroki Kato. Great guy. He and I became very good friends. And Hiroki weighed all of about 125 pounds. And so, and Hiroki had his own physical therapist from Japan show up, and at the end of the first day, practice, he's putting tape on his shoulders, the therapist. And I'm like, hey, Hiroki-san, what's that? He's like, oh, Japanese magic tape, make your body feel way better. And so he gave me a little bit of Japanese magic tape. And then you're sharing this little room that's at the racetrack. It's got a shower and 2 beds in it. And so, I don't know if you've ever seen like a 125-pound tiny little Japanese guy in tidy whities, but it's pretty.
Not recently, no.
No.
I tell you what, it burns the eyeballs. It burns them. But, so it was funny. And so anyway, we get to like 10 o'clock in the morning, and I am having a great Le Mans. I am enjoying it so much. I'm having great stints. We're running 5th, and I get back to our little room, and Hiroki's there. And I swear to God, he looks like a mummy. He's got, Japanese magic tape all over his body, and he's moaning. He's like, "Oh, Johnny-san, I don't think I get back in car." And I was like, but I got this visual of like, Hiroki Kato-san and his tidy whities with tape all over him. Oh Lord, I wish I could get that vision out of my head. But that was pretty. I'll finish with a great one, and that was my last win at Le Mans was 2009. It was myself, Jan Magnussen, and Antonio Garcia. Le Mans back in the day, 2 drivers would do it, and it was doable. But back in the day, the cars weren't as athletic. The G-forces were a percentage of what they are now. Well, Jan got food poisoning, and from 9:30, 10 o'clock, Saturday night, he's out. So it was Antonio Garcia and I doing doubles and triples all the way to the end of the race, and we wound up winning. So that one, I would say, if there's a memory, a racing memory, that's probably my most favorite. That's likely it.
Man, that's just gotten it out there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Pure want to.
Yeah.
Did you get any sleep during 24-hour races like that?
No, it's on and off. You might sleep, 60%, but you never go to a deep sleep because you're anticipating you're going to get that knock on the door saying, "All right, you're up in half an hour." And but one of the things that is nice especially when you're racing with a big team, you get out of the car, you get a quick shower, bite to eat, massage if you need one. And but they take your driver suit, they wash it. You always have a couple suits there, because if you can get back into a clean, fresh driver suit, it's amazing just how much better that makes you feel, rather than just being nasty, wet, and sweaty the whole time.
Yeah, I always think about that when guys win the 500 and they get doused with the milk, and then they do interviews till 8, 9 o'clock at night in those uniforms. I always thought, why don't go change that? Go put that somewhere where somebody don't steal it.
Yeah.
And then go back out with a fresh uniform, fresh fireproof, and you'd feel so much better.
You would, but I tell you what, if I had the opportunity to have smelt like sour milk I'd have worn that suit as long as they made me. So, yeah, no, you know what I mean? It is, that place is special. And, I'm lucky. I'm, friends with a bunch of guys that have won it. And some of those guys, I'm a big fan of Helio. He and I are buds. Will Power, of course, Chevy guy, great guy. Dario Franchitti, when I look at IndyCar, I'm like, man, imagine what Dario could have done if he hadn't gotten hurt. And
right.
So, they're the 500. Trust me, even though it wasn't my place, it is still one of the most special places in the world.
Oh, absolutely.
One other thing, and I have asked this of a lot of guests, because obviously you have immense talent. I mean, there's no two ways about it. You've been fast since that day you were sitting on your dad's lap. What and I realize that it takes money to get where you're going, but honest to God, at the end of the day, what do you think separated you from maybe other guys who had similar talent?
Well, luck, getting the right break, getting an opportunity and making the most of it. One of my biggest breaks came when I was working as an instructor at the Bondurant School. In that, this was down in Phoenix, and I'd been doing some driving in the GTO car, and NPTI showed up to test at one of the tracks at Firebird. And I just went over there to shake hands, kiss babies, get my name on the roster. And one of the engineers was like, "Hey, Brabham's got to leave early tomorrow. You want to finish his work?" And I thought he was joking. I was like, "You're kidding, right?" He's like, "No, we've been wanting to put you in the car for a while." And so, and Lion Dyke was there and Bob Earl was there. But you could see the entire racetrack. So I could see where Jeff was changing gears, braking, all that kind of stuff, visualize it. And then when I got into the car, it went quick. It didn't go as quick as Jeff did, but quick enough that they're like, "Oh, we want you." And so, and that was, had I not done that, I might still be working as an instructor at Bondurant. So it's when you get that opportunity, and most guys do get at some point an opportunity. And if you can make that opportunity and take it and be special, well, then I think then you can make it happen.
Is it a case of being prepared to be able to say yes?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and visualizing it. I mean, I always visualize, I never visualized failure. I always visualized this is going to happen. And although I would have preferred it happen with the getting to do the European route, it didn't. And, we made the most of what came our way.
Sure.
Well, Johnny, I don't have anything else. You have anything else, Scott?
I don't. I just want to say thank you so much for sharing your stories with us, and I'm sure Aaron will tell you this. You are welcome on here anytime. So if you ever get anything going on, man, we'd love to have you back.
Well, cool. Well, thank you. And I should have some stuff going for 2023. Nothing I can talk about it yet, but like I've been saying for the last 5 years, I'm not retired yet. So we'll get back out there.
Absolutely.
Johnny Caples told me one time, he goes, "I never retired. I just never put my helmet back on."
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm putting mine back on. So
there you go.
Perfect.
All right. Thanks.
All right. Yep. Thank you, Johnny. Appreciate it.